great pleasure to have with us this morning Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Dr. Michael Ledeen, and Mary Kissel of the Wall Street Journal, who is going to moderate what is sure to be a fascinating discussion. So panelists, please come on up.
Never take us down, not now or any day. Our freedom don't come free, but it's worth the price we pay. The dream inside us all, it cannot be denied. Together let us raise up freedom's flag.
All right, why don't we go right here? There we are. Good morning, everyone. Isn't this a great conference or what? Let's give a hand to Jennifer and the rest of the Steamboat team. I'm wondering if we can maybe take this down from the front. Thank you so much. Well, it's truly an honor to be hosting two of our most, here we go. Thank you, General.
I can do something.
We'll introduce the panel from right to left, starting with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. He is the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. His awards include the Bronze Star, the Legion of Merit, and a host of other accolades, too numerous to name here. He's the graduate of the University of Rhode Island. He holds 3 master's degrees. Prior to his appointment as DIA chief, he served in a variety of command and staff positions, including Director of Intelligence of U.S. Central Command, Director of Intelligence of the Joint Staff. Again, it's a list too long to elaborate on here. You can read it in his bio. He served all over the world: Grenada, Haiti, Afghanistan, you know, all those beautiful places. To my right is Dr. Michael Ledeen. He's the Freedom Scholar at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's an internationally renowned scholar on Iran, Iraq, terrorism, and international security. Dr. Ledeen has served as a consultant to the National Security Council, the State Department, the Defense Department, and a special advisor to the Secretary of State. He holds a PhD in modern European history and philosophy from the University of Wisconsin and is taught at Washington University in St. Louis and the University of Rome. He is the author of more than 35 books.
So when you're going to write your first one, find a guy that wrote 35.
And as far as the Lieutenant General goes, he looks like a nice guy, but beware, he could kill you. So as Jennifer said, we do live in an age of global disorder. The threat from Islamic Jihad is not something that is far away anymore. It is here at home. Major Nidal Nissan screaming Allahu Akbar in Fort Hood in November 2009, murdering 13, wounding 30. The president called it workplace violence. We've had the Boston bombings, San Bernardino, December 2015, killing 14 people at a Christmas party. The people that were killed had hosted the terrorist and his wife, thrown a party for them. Orlando, June 2016, Omar Mateen, killing 49, wounding 53, called 911 and said, "I am doing this for the Islamic State." And still we're having questions about why he did it. That's just, of course, the domestic attacks. Paris, November 2015, 137 dead. Brussels, March 2016, 32 dead. Istanbul in July, 42. Baghdad in July, same month, more than 320 dead. So this is a timely topic. And the book we're going to discuss today is called The Field of Fight: How Can We Win the Global War Against Radical Islam and Its Allies? And so we're going to start off with the basics. General Flynn, why did you write the book?
Yeah, we wrote the book for 2 reasons, but before I state those, I want to tell you, in the last 60 days alone, just in the last 60 days, in 25 countries there have been Islamic State-inspired or directed attacks, over 150 of them in the last 60 days alone, resulting in over 7,000 people killed or wounded. So when we talk about, what is going on out there, and this is really the principal reason why we wrote the book, there is a war being waged. The Islamic State actually declared war against us, the West, and principally the United States of America. And our government, inside of our government, we're not even allowed to say or to describe what this enemy is. in the, this notion of radical Islamist terrorism. So that's been excised from our training. It's been excised from many of the things that we do, and many of the folks that I have served with over time, and certainly that are overseas today, still fighting this very deadly enemy, still can't describe it, still are not allowed to define it the way it's supposed to be defined. And then the second major purpose for why we wrote this thing was because, I like to say it like this: there's no enemy that's unbeatable, and there's no ideology better than the American ideology. So and there's a whole chapter on how to win, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. But there's a lot of books out there about how bad this threat is, and I think when Michael and I sat down, we said, well, let's lay out a campaign plan, a strategy to win, and in fact that's what we've done, and we've gotten great feedback on some of the components of what we've laid out, and we'll talk a little bit about those as we go.
So let's start by talking a little bit about the enemy. How do you define the enemy? Because today it's very dispersed. The threat of terror isn't just from Iraq and Afghanistan anymore. It's all over the world. So who exactly are we fighting?
We're fighting an alliance of radical Muslims and radical secularists. And they're in cahoots. They work together, and their fundamental objective is to rule the world, which requires eliminating us. So we are their prime candidate, and it extends from radical Muslim countries like Iran and radical Muslim movements like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and so forth, all the way to people who are certainly not radical Muslims, Putin, North Korea, Cuba, so forth. These are people who are not radical Muslims, but there's an alliance between them and the jihadis, and that's what we're fighting.
And directed against our way of life too. So, it's a fascinating thing when you start to really look at some of these countries that are around the world. But one of the things that I like to remind people of is that the longest sort of surviving empire in the history of the world was the Ottoman Empire. And it actually was only a little bit more than 100 years ago. In fact, the last caliph actually made it to about, I think, the early 30s, 1930s. So 1,400 years that lasted. And what you have is this resurgence or this resurrection of this notion of an Islamic state with its caliph. And when you, like I just mentioned, in 25 countries, when you look at where the footprint is, and the other aspect of this is because it's not, people, we were having this discussion the other day. People go, well, how much should we worry about right here in this country? Well, right now, our FBI has 1,000 cases in play against the Islamic State in all 50 states. So, I mean, if that doesn't concern you, and I can talk all sorts of things about the state of Colorado, because the state of Colorado has been actually has had one of the highest numbers of females being recruited going off to Syria and Iraq to fight. So fascinating, the sort of the infiltration into the mindset, into the culture that exists right here in this country.
And why are we having this resurgence? Because I recall when President Obama took office, Vice President Biden went on Charlie Rose and he said, Iraq will be the greatest achievement of this administration. We've effectively won. They'll have democracy. We can retreat from the Middle East. So why did the resurgence happen, Michael?
Because there are big, strong countries that don't want democracy, that fear democracy. The basic reason for the hatred of America in all these countries is that the dictators and tyrants who rule those countries know that their people would rather live the way we do than the way they are. So our very existence threatens them in the most fundamental way.
But weren't we winning in Iraq? General, didn't we win in Iraq?
We've won everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I mean, one of the things that were some really unbelievably stupid decisions over the last, 15, 20 years actually, but, the attack into Iraq initially in 2003 will go down, at least in this first half of this century, as probably one of the biggest strategic errors made by our government. The second one was after we got in there and we fought these guys, And we actually beat them. We beat them pretty badly. And in 2011, this administration, the current administration, could not get a status of forces agreement. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State at the time. It was a disaster. They could have easily done that. All they had to do was just tell them, this is what we're going to do. But the president made a political promise that had nothing to do with our security, nothing to do with our national security, and it went against damn near every single person that was around him at the time. And he made the decision to unplug from Iraq. And that decision to unplug from Iraq was probably the second biggest strategic error that our country has made as things are unfolding, unraveling in many cases around certainly the Middle East, but actually around the world now because of this refugee problem is just unbelievable. And we know for a fact that the refugees or the Islamic State has stated in their intentions and their plans to infiltrate into these refugee populations that are going into Europe and coming here into the United States. So when we unplugged from Iraq, that led to the rise of what we now see as the Islamic State, and in no uncertain terms. You cannot have victory in warfare and then not sustain that victory. So we had victory in Iraq in the 2009 to 2011 time frame, and then the president decided almost unilaterally, with a few exceptions, a couple of people that are around him, to just unplug.
Before we go there, though, I want to talk about how we achieved that victory in Iraq, because it's something that you explore in the book. What did you learn from the experience in Iraq, from the initial expectations to what you found in the field, and how did that war turn around?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I say this once in a while, but, and a bit facetiously, that we were actually being beaten in 2006 by a bunch of guys in shower shoes and bathrobes. Okay? And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek a little bit because, when we look at them, when an American looks at somebody like that, and they go, hey, what's going on? I mean, so we had to be really, really creative, really imaginative, and what you want to do in warfare is you want to pressure the enemy wherever they are. And so part of what we ended up doing, and to get from sort of 2006 to 2011, where essentially we put this fire out. So we put this fire out. It was smoldering, but we put the fire out. And to get there, we had to increase our operational tempo on the battlefield.
Maybe explain what you were doing at that time, you were.
At the time, we were, my particular role, I was the senior intelligence officer for special operations in pretty much in the Middle East, in the greater Middle East, and that included East Africa. And so we had forces just about everywhere, and we were looking, we were trying to pressure the networks of Al-Qaeda, and we were doing a pretty effective job. I mean, we went from about 4 raids a month, 4 combat raids a month, to over 300 in a period of 2 years, a very short period of time. And that ability to be able to do that put relentless pressure on this enemy, and then they could not regenerate themselves fast enough. And that basically, along with just some very smart conventional operations inside of places like Iraq and Baghdad, we were able to basically win. And around 2009, we knew at that point in time that we were going to win this thing. And it went off, for another couple of years. So 2 more years go by. President Obama, of course, comes into office, and he wants nothing to do with Iraq. I mean, it basically unplugged from Iraq and said, well, we're going to, the good war is going to be Afghanistan. And today, Afghanistan is a total disaster.
Michael.
The big thing that I learned working with General Flynn on this book is the degree to which he and General McChrystal changed the way that we do intelligence in war in this day and age.
How exactly?
Because it really is revolutionary. Well, the traditional way, it's in all the movies, somebody on the battlefield finds out something, it gets relayed up the chain of command, goes to some important guy. The important guy looks at it and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. That order gets transmitted down through the chain of command back onto the battlefield, and they do it. Can't work in this kind of war because the enemy's too fast, too smart, too adaptive, and so on. You say you cannot give them the time to evaluate their own success and our response to it. So basically, Generals Flynn and McChrystal turned this thing around so that it became a matter of hours. From the time the intelligence came in, the interrogators went to work on people on the battlefield, their documents were analyzed, and then it got turned around and sent back to the war fighters, who by then knew what to do, who to go after, what questions to ask, and so on. And that's a democratic revolution because it cuts out all the top brass.
All the
I mean,
bureaucracy.
you don't have time for them.
And is it only intelligence being gathered on the battlefield? I noticed a mention of something called the National Media Exploitation Center,
Yeah.
which I've never heard of. Has anybody
Yeah.
else in the audience heard of this?
Yeah,
What is
probably
that?
not.
And how important were also public sources of information in
Yeah, I
in
mean,
this
it's amazing.
gathering?
I mean, we captured an awful lot of documents on the battlefield. I mean, everything, thumb drives, computers, discs, CDs, all sorts of stuff, newspapers. We found entire buildings filled with like propaganda that they were studying, they were training on. I mean, this is a very sophisticated enemy that we're facing. They now have their 15th edition of a magazine that they put out called Dabiq, a very popular magazine in the world of radical Islamism. So what we were trying to do is to get information, as Michael just described, get information and turn it as fast as we could. And so what we essentially basically did was we broke through all the barriers. So in the normal world, you've got to go up the chain of command to ask for permission, and we just basically didn't ask for permission. We begged for forgiveness at that point. And we went from operating a facility in Balad, Iraq, northern Iraq, and we created the same thing over in Bagram, Afghanistan. And we basically went directly to this organization called the National Media Exploitation Center, and it was through personal relationships primarily. And we had essentially a national capability working for what essentially was a tactical organization on the battlefield, unprecedented certainly in warfare. And what it allowed us to do, we could run operations at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, turn information in about 4 hours, and then run operations again at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And these are high-end combat raids, putting people on a target. You're hopefully not going to get into a firefight. Most of the time, it was element of surprise. But we went from four raids a month to 300, so 30 a night, and combat raids. And when you see stuff in the movies, you're talking about 30. Upwards of 10 to 15 a night, over a period of a month. It's just unbelievable.
So this is a long war.
Yeah.
These jihadis are committed to killing us and our way of life. We were losing in Iraq until this intelligence revolution happened. But there's a quote in your book that I loved. It said, quote, "Intelligence doesn't do you a bit of good if you aren't able to get it to those who can actually do something about it." Can you talk a little bit about the politicization of intelligence that you encountered while you were serving in these commands?
Yeah, and so the more senior I got, the more you get into the sort of the political realm, particularly running one of the largest intelligence agencies in the world, never mind the country. So a lot of you have seen lately in the news with this Central Command intelligence stuff that's been going on in there, and you have a bunch of analysts who are sort of whistleblowers, and they complain that what they were seeing and reporting wasn't getting into the decision makers. So what I saw, and I saw some of that, but what I saw and I'll be very blunt here, I saw a president of the United States lie to the American public leading up to the last election. And when you start to see things like, you know, the enemies, you know, this enemy's JV team, they're on the run, you know, why do we have to call them the way we call them, you know, whatever we name them. So what we're facing is we're facing a political atmosphere in our country right now, and this has existed for a couple of years now, where they take the intelligence and they basically manipulate it the way they want to manipulate it in order to support some policy decision. And I know we want to talk a little bit about Iran because this is also
Please.
part of it. And so when you hear the President of the United States or those in our government talk about, you know, that this enemy is on the run. I mean, and his JV comment was January of 2014. The following month, I testified in front of Congress and basically said they've doubled in capacity, geographic footprint around the world, and it was a complete, diametrically opposed statement for what the President of the United States had just said. So we cannot allow intelligence. Intelligence is a big part of the United States system, whether you know it or not. It just is. I mean, the intelligence apparatus that we have does everything from trying to figure out what our enemies' economic systems are and what they're doing to us. It does a lot of different things. Intelligence is always supposed to be truth to power. Truth to power. Now, the decision makers, the policy makers, the president, they can decide to go a different direction with a policy, but the people in the intelligence system have to believe that what they're reporting is actually getting into the right people. And there is a breakdown between those in the field, so those who actually need it, and those who are making decisions with it. And that's the sort of what I call the gap between the bars and the stars. You know, you have people out in the field that are trying to, you know, win our nation's battles, and you have a White House essentially that's manipulating every piece of everything that they get.
So we know who the enemy is. We know how to win because we demonstrated it in Iraq. The threat is bigger today. Michael, let's talk about Iran and link this in with what the general just spoke of.
Okay, if it's okay, let's add the ideological ingredient.
Please.
Because you can't win a war of this sort without destroying the enemy ideology, exposing its hollowness, its failure, and so forth. The 20th century, this is a very traditional kind of enemy. It's a totalitarian mass movement that believes that history, God, Allah is on their side. They are destined to defeat us, etc. We need to go out there and say, these people are wrong, their ideology has failed. Every time they win a battle someplace, they proclaim, we're winning because God has supported us, because this shows that we're on the right path. So, when we defeated them in Iraq, our president stood up and said, well, what happened here? I mean, Allah's on your side, and now you've lost. Has he changed sides?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Right? Well, you know.
It's the same thing with communism. I mean, when we beat communism, you know, they thought that they were this perfect system. And so it's the same idea. I mean, we're facing another sort of ism in this case, in radical Islamism. And it is a big problem. And what we have to be able to do is we have to be able to call it out for what it is. When you know, some of the things we talk about in the book is I think just unbelievably intellectually courageous speech that President al-Sisi gave in Egypt a little over a year and a half ago now. And we should have embraced that. I mean, here you have a leader of one of the largest Arab, you know, Muslim worlds in the world, Muslim countries in the world. And he gives this great speech calling essentially for a revolution or a reformation in Islam. Because in his words, like he said, he goes, should we expect 1.7 billion people, Muslims on the planet, to kill the other 7 billion? No, of course not. Of course not. And instead of embracing him, we actually pushed him away.
But why?
Because it's an ideology that doesn't sit well with this current president. At that time, they were working very hard on the Iranian nuclear deal. And there is an enormous amount of influence in this country right now, in our government at the federal level, by some very serious groups that are well-funded, and they basically have the ear of the president.
Let's talk a little bit about Iran and the threat, because I want to get to the prescription and how we should be waging this war, but I don't want to miss Iran. Michael, can you describe the threat from Iran, and then I want to go to the general and
Listen,
what you've
Iran's
observed
been
on the
at war with
battlefield.
the Iranian Revolution that brought this radical regime to power is 1979. It's a long time. They declared war against us right then and there, early 1979. And they have been waging war against us nonstop ever since, Iran. And it's not just rhetorical. When I lecture about Iran, I always say, well, we've all seen on TV these thousands of people in the streets chanting, "Death to America, death to America." What do you think they mean? What's that all about? Is that some kind of street festival? Is it Iranians having fun or what? And the answer, of course, is no. It's what they intend to do. And so we had better get them first, because they will do. They have killed thousands and thousands of Americans.
You list this in the book, and it's
Yeah.
really a remarkable chapter in the book, because some of the attacks you wouldn't necessarily associate with Iran.
Right.
For example, the East Africa embassy bombings.
Well, right, but they trained Al-Qaeda. And hardly anybody recognizes that Al-Qaeda and Iran have been in cahoots from day one. Iran trained them to do those. Whenever you see simultaneous explosions going on somewhere over there, where there's an explosion in one embassy in one place and another embassy in another place, and they're almost contemporaneous, that is an Iranian footprint. That is Hezbollah. They're the ones who perfected that. And Osama bin Laden went to Hezbollah and said, boy, that is really great. We want to learn how to do that. Will you train us? And they did. And a lot of them were trained in Iran. A lot of them are still trained in Iran today. A lot of leading Al-Qaeda people are still there. When we smashed them in Afghanistan in 2001, the leaders of Al-Qaeda went to Iran. Osama bin Laden's family ended up in Iran.
They're still there today.
Yeah. So that's going on. So these are the people we have to go after. And Iran, you will not negotiate a deal with Iran. Iran will never honor an agreement that says they won't be mean to us, they won't kill us, they won't attack us. Never. It is a central part of their existence that we must be destroyed and they must be the destroyers.
Think about this. In 1984, under Ronald Reagan, Iran was designated by our State Department, essentially, who does this, as the leading state sponsor of terrorism. Okay, of state-sponsored terrorism. 1984. They're still the number one. They're still on that list today. So if you can Google this, you can go to the State Department website and look up, state sponsors of terrorism. Iran is still on that list, at the top of that list today. We just gave Iran a path to a nuclear bomb, and then just billions and billions of dollars. And we paid them this $400 million here recently. And then you've seen on this trickling out to this $1.9 billion that was also paid in lump sums of cash for God knows what. The Death to America, that's like the national anthem for Iran. And they've violated, so since last July, when we started writing the book and when the deal was sort of, it hasn't been signed, but it doesn't even matter. Iran's not going to, they won't sign it. They're going to get everything, at least according to this administration. So since last July, they have violated that agreement at least a dozen times. So it's this craziness. And then on one little sidebar, on Hezbollah. Hezbollah is sort of the action arm of the IRGC Quds Force, which is kind of the special forces of Iran. Hezbollah has operations in South America. We talk a little bit about this in the book. And this sort of funny relationship between Hezbollah, which is a gigantic They are so deeply involved in the transnational narcotics deals going on, and a lot of that happens right here in our hemisphere, South America especially. And then what Hezbollah does to sponsor individuals coming up into this country. So, for example, there are, in this case, they actually lease routes coming in across the southern border, principally in Texas, from the Sinaloa drug cartel. So they actually lease these. So that, it's basically none of the folks that are coming up from Latin or South America are going to use that route. That'll only be used for the Arabs. Over 950 Arabs have been picked up on that particular route. 300 of them we know now that they're back in our country because of whatever the reasons were. There's a variety of them why they were let go. But on these routes that they lease, they actually pay for the routes to the Mexican drug cartels. I mean, it's stunning what is going on in the country, and a lot of it is not so much. It's not so much the imposition of drugs or to make money for themselves. It's really to get inside of our bloodstream. And actually, in the Muslim Brotherhood, if you read there, a lot of what they write about, they actually talk about getting inside of the bloodstream of the West, and principally the United States of America. And to do that, they are infiltrating very overtly, and they're infiltrating very covertly into our country. And that's been going on over the last couple of decades, certainly since 1979.
Just a side note, when the general says we've effectively given Iran a nuclear pass, it's because when the deal expires after 10 years, we welcome Iran into the nuclear club.
Yeah.
So the deal actually does make Iran a nuclear
Gives
power.
them a nuclear bomb, whether they have it in a year, which they could potentially do, or it's the 10-year mark, which is essentially what comes out of the deal. And it was one of the again sort of another huge disaster for our country was this deal at a time when we could have done a lot more to have a different conversation with those countries, the P5, which is the UN Security Council, and then +1, which was Germany.
So it's a totalitarian movement. We've faced it in Iraq. We've won. Intelligence has been politicized. Iran, we've done a deal with for political reasons. Michael, I just want to go to a theme that you raised very early on in the panel, which is that it's not just Iran, that they are making alliances. And there's a line in the book that the general uses. He says, religious fanatics and secular tyrants work quite well together. That line really struck me. So how is this threat emanating out from Iran, and how do you see these alliances forming?
Well, just look at Syria, and you see it right there. You have the number one security issue for Iran is the survival of the Assad regime in Syria. It's everything to them. Khamenei has told his people, no limit on money spent, no limit on casualties, no limit on expansive attacks and so forth.
Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran.
Assad must be saved. All right? So they went into Syria and they fought for a while and they lost. I mean, the opposition was defeating them. And so General Soleimani, now this famous, iconic, good-looking guy, goes to Moscow. Don't you think he's good-looking?
No, not really, but that's okay. Anyway,
No,
moving swiftly forward.
he sure does. Anyway, so Soleimani goes to Moscow and he says what the Iranians typically say when they're in war, we're losing. Help us. And that's how the Russians got into this war on the ground. And Putin said, love to. What a lovely invitation. Here we come. So the air base in Iran, expand sea bases in Syria, bombing foot soldiers, so forth, and there they are, the Iranians and
So
the Russians.
an Islamic regime, an authoritarian regime getting together. Does that also include someday Asia and China?
Well, sure, because today I mean, the Chinese are in this game too. You may have noticed the Chinese are now building a naval base just down the road from ours in Djibouti. Yeah, isn't that something? I'll bet hardly
Yeah.
one American out of a million noticed that story, and yet it's a huge story. There's a very intimate cooperation between North Korea.
Djibouti's in East Africa. China is building a large naval base
Thank you.
in East Africa.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
There is intimate cooperation and has been all along between North Korea and Iran on all kinds of nuclear stuff, missiles, bombs, warheads, so forth.
Well,
I will bet anybody who feels flush 5-1 that Iran will have a nuclear weapon and a delivery system in less than 5 years, never mind 10 years or 15 years or whatever it is. They're not going to stop. Why should they stop? Why should they obey any of the provisions of this so-called deal, which doesn't even exist and which they've never formally agreed to and which nobody has signed?
One of
Not
the-
us, not them, not anyone.
one of the most striking observations in the book is that
I mean, you
Had-
can't
had-
make. I'm
well,
sorry.
no,
man,
please, please.
What Michael just said, you can't make this up. I mean, you can't make this up. This is how foolish. How incompetent. This is how incompetent our government is, and frankly, the leadership. And I use that in very loose quotes. That word. Who's running our country right now? I mean, when I'm speaking, when I speak, I'm speaking for a lot of people, particularly a lot of people that have been, that have been involved in military operations for a long time, certainly national security of our country. And you cannot make this up. This is so devastating for the United States of America, for our national security. And that's why, partly why this is a very important message in the book, but it's also, it's to basically say, hey, we got to wake up here. I mean, this is unbelievable. People don't think, and I've been, listening to all the speakers the last couple of days about our economy and all the kinds of things, and education, great question on education, all these other things. But you see some of the quotes. I love watching the quotes that you have posted when you're on the breaks and stuff, Jennifer. They're great. Some of these great quotes from some of these great leaders, But people have to remember that there are countries on this planet that want to see the collapse of the United States of America. And don't think for a second that they don't. That we need to have America just continue to flourish. No. But believe me, there's an alliance of them. And we've mentioned a couple of them up here today.
And right now they're winning and we're
Yeah.
losing.
Well, I
Yeah.
want to move to that, to
Yeah.
the solutions, because I want to make sure that we open it up to the floor and
Yeah.
leave plenty of time for you all to ask questions. But again, just a side note, one of the more interesting observations, this line stuck out, is that if Israel had not bombed the Syrian nuclear facility, the Islamic State would have already have
that's
had
right.
a nuclear weapon. But that's an aside. The
Well,
book
but
is
that's an important one. So because this is important, most people in here don't even know about this. For 10 years, Syria was building a plutonium weapons plant, essentially, for 10 years. And it started in the late 90s, and it went all the way through until Israel decided in September of 2007. Okay, September of 2007. I was the head of intelligence for all of Central Command at the time, and this was one of the things that in fact, we had done a lot of planning to destroy it, and Israel ended up going in and destroying it. And so here's Syria, under our noses, with the help of North Korea, and we talk about this in the book, building essentially an atomic bomb inside of Syria to use, okay? And good enough for Israel, because it's a survival thing. They decided that because it was very close to being completed. It was 10 years underway, very close to being completed. So that was in eastern Syria, okay, close to this Raqqa that you hear about if you read about in the news sometimes. So the Islamic State would have owned that territory and would have owned that capability had Israel not gone in and destroyed it in 2007. So very important, a little bit of a sidebar. We talk about it in the book because these are These are people with a different, nations with a different way of thinking about how life should be on this planet.
I want to move to the solutions quickly. Michael, what's the first thing the next president should do?
The first thing is permit the language to be changed so that we can talk truthfully and accurately about what's going on. We've got to. It's funny how important the First Amendment turns out to be in waging war, right? If you can't describe your enemy, it's very hard to defeat him. So it's got to be possible for us to describe the war we're in and the enemies we're fighting and so forth. So that's number one. Enough with this censorship, this politically correct censorship that's been going on. That's the first big thing. And the second thing is to tell our commanders in the field to win the war.
Yep.
Win.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
right, General
It's a
Flynn?
novel concept. I mean, but I'm going to tell you, it's not something. I've sat in a lot of senior leader meetings over 15 years, and we told Donald Rumsfeld when he came out to visit us one time in 2005. We said, if you told us that we were going to go to war and we weren't going to come home until we won, we would have done everything differently. We would have fought differently. We would have resourced differently. And trust me, it would have cost us, a tenth of what it's cost us in both treasure and lives. But that's not how we do things these days. And it's and again, we talk a little bit about that because now it's about winning. And just as Michael just said, Eisenhower was told, go into Europe and defeat the Nazis. Is that clear? And I mean, that's the kind of great, mission statement that you want to give to your military leaders because they can do that. We can actually do that. But we haven't been given that.
You often hear leaders, particularly on the political left, say, but the American people don't support conflict and war anymore. They don't want to be in the Middle East. But is that a function of not explaining to them why we need to be there?
No, it's the wrong question. It's all these doctrines, the Weinberger doctrine, the Powell doctrine, and so forth, they all say, don't go into war unless you have an exit strategy. Well, the exit strategy is winning. and the other thing that these doctrines all say is you have to have a consensus, public consensus, before you go to war. But the consensus that matters, the only one that matters, is the one at the end of the war, not the one at the beginning of the war. Right. And if you win, you'll have the consensus. And if you lose, you won't. Machiavelli, chapter 2. If you are victorious, this is a direct quote, if you are victorious, the people will always judge the methods you used were appropriate. Right? He doesn't say the end justifies the means. He says if you win, people will admire what you did, whatever it was, because you're a winner. And if you lose, it doesn't matter how moral or ethical or politically correct you were, because you're a loser. And they will despise you.
So, General, what do we have to do? Can Assad stay in power, or do we have to take him out of power?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Assad eventually has to go. He has to go. I mean, we are sort of behind the power curve on when we could have gotten him out of there. But eventually, a guy like an Assad has to go. What's going to happen in the Middle East is the Middle East is going to be reborn. It's going to be redrawn. You're going to see a confederation be created. Confederation meaning essentially the breakup of the area into sort of tribal zones, if you will. It's already happening. There's a conversation going on in Europe now about this new sort of restructuring and what will happen. And you'll see it go back to really more tribal than legitimate nation states.
Well, these borders don't really exist
The
anymore,
borders
do
don't. They don't. And so that's sort of what's happening. I think back to this notion of winning. I mean, had we not done what we did in World War II, we'd be praying at the altar of Adolf Hitler. I mean, and that took enormous sacrifice, but also a lot of things that we would never get away with today in warfare in Europe. And also the dropping of 2 atomic bombs in Japan. And so it's like Michael said, if you win, nobody really, everybody's going to say, great, we won. We can make the decisions. We can decide what will happen, to people like Assad and others, and make those decisions and make them legitimately with our sort of values, our principles, our moral being. And but today we don't have that. We don't have that. And it's all we are doing right now, folks, is we're participating in this never-ending conflict. And I can tell you, from a military person, none of us want that. We don't want to just keep going over and over and over. Some of you I've talked to have a couple of you in the room here have children. And I'm just calling them children, young men and women that are serving in our armed forces, that are potentially deploying. And I have a son that's deployed 3 times to Afghanistan. So I mean, I don't want this to continue to happen. I want this to end. And the way you get it to end is you say win. And you're going to have people that may come back and say, okay, here's kind of what we're going to do. Okay, win. As long as you're going to win, then I'm okay with it. And I'm telling you, I know the American public, maybe not so much in this room, but maybe, is tough, resilient, and that's what America wants. America wants to win. We are a nation of winners. Nobody gets up in the morning and goes, geez, today I think I'm going to lose. Well, I can tell you, in our military, and I can tell you in other parts of our government, particularly the State Department, we have people that I question whether or not that's what they say when they get up in the morning. I question whether they actually say, let's get out there and win today. Because it's this perpetual engagement that we're involved in. We just can't afford it anymore.
If it's okay with you guys, I'd like to open it up to the floor so that we have a significant amount of time for questions from the audience. Please wait until the mic comes to you, and I'll just repeat the rules. Name, affiliation, and question. Back there, the gentleman right in the back. Yes, sir.
General Flynn, Les Hampton, United States Navy, retired. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have many questions about our conflict, but I'm going to reduce it to one very simple question to you. What influence do you believe that Valerie Jarrett has in our footing on the war?
Extraordinary. I mean, extraordinary influence, and dangerous. So to keep it very short.
Have you been in a room with her?
Yeah, I have met her, and I would just tell you that an extraordinary. In fact, there are people around the President of the United States for certain reasons. Chief of Staff is an example. Others. But when you have people that are influencing like that, I would prefer that they're at least Senate confirmed, so they can be grilled for what their beliefs are and why do they want this job. But they're not. In her case, she's not a congressionally confirmed position. So she has an extraordinary access, influence, and actually very dangerous to this country because of what we just talked about up here, which is this Iranian nuclear deal.
Just for folks who don't know her, a friend of Obama's, a history with Iran.
Born in Iran.
Born in Iran.
Born in Iran, lived first 5-6 years of her life in Iran. In recent years, she has gone around the Middle East and spoken to the top people there and said to them, I am in charge of Iran policy. You want to talk about Iran policy? I'm your point of reference in Washington. Come to me. and I will be coming back to you. Now, of all to me, the American press has done a really atrocious job in explaining to the American people who is Obama, what is he about, what do his policies entail. And part of that is the failure of anyone in the general public to understand who is and what does Valerie Jarrett do. I mean, that would seem to be one of the biggest stories and one of the most obvious stories. And if you live in Washington, it must be doable. Must be. It's always been doable. And yet nobody has really taken it on. Now, I defy you to find one really good, say, New Yorker-style, long profile, etc. Valerie Jarrett's not there. We don't know.
A question from the lady, the gentleman in the back.
Thank you. Dunn Scott, official U.S. taxpayer and charter member of the vast right-wing conspiracy. Question for Dr. Ledeen. Thank you for the panel, by the way, Mary. This is terrific. Dr. Ledeen, you've written often about the Iranian opposition movements and our lack of support for them. Is there a possibility that support for those movements might bring this regime down?
Yes, I think so. I think right now there are demonstrations going on all around Iran because people are very unhappy at the alliance with Russia. They hate Russia. So their rulers they've gone over their heads and made this deal with a country that they hate. You know, Russia's been messing around in Iran for several hundred years, and that's real enmity. So yes, there's plenty of things, but it requires, above everything else, the American president, the American Secretary of State, etc., to stand up and say, enough already with these people. We want free Iran. We want the Iranians to decide how they want to be governed and who's going to govern them. And that is the way it starts.
Yeah, I watched I was in 2009, summer of 2009, I think it was July or August. We read a little bit about this in the book when the Green Revolution was going on inside of Iran and all over the capital city of Tehran. So here we are in Afghanistan. We had a large number of forces in Iraq, and the people of Iran did not want U.S. military support into Iran at that time. All they wanted was moral backing. They wanted our president to essentially say, we back you, we back your movement. And that Green Revolution would have been successful. And when we did not back it, it was a couple of days that were very, very tense. And we're watching this. I'm sitting in Afghanistan as the senior intelligence officer at the time. We're watching this very closely. And we were reporting back, and we did nothing. We did nothing. So over about a 3 or 4 day period of time, the Iranian regime crushed that movement. That movement could have potentially have survived and maybe overthrown the regime at the time. I believe that it could have, but we gave them no moral support, none. And so, again, if people are fighting for their own freedom, what does America stand for if we don't at least publicly say that we're with you? We're with you trying to achieve some level of freedom, and we didn't do it.
Is that publicly, widely known that
No.
the Green Revolution could have overthrown the Iranian?
I doubt it.
And what makes you say that?
Nobody wrote about it. Nobody really talked about it.
But what
when
was
it
it?
was all said and done, they killed a lot of people. They jailed a bunch of them. They're still in jail today.
It's only now that
Yeah.
it's really beginning to be covered. I mean,
Right.
your colleague Jay Solomon,
Yeah.
who's done really exemplary work on all of this, he's now published a book, and there are things in there that will just astonish you. Just astonish you.
But you should buy their book first. I love Jay, but buy that book second. Sorry. We have a question. We're going to go from right to left. Right here in the corner, name, affiliation, and question.
Robert Gochi, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army in the 60s. And just as to General Flynn, I noticed an undertone here from too many of the people that have spoken that they're not real proud of who they're supporting on the Republican ticket this year. Now, you stepped out pretty early and are an advisor to our candidate. Is there some reason why you stepped forward and are supporting them rather than supporting some of the other candidates who did not have the gravitas to get the nomination?
Well, I'll tell you, the very first candidate that I supported was speaking last night, Carly Fiorina. I'm a big fan of hers. You know. But I, you know, and I actually advised 5 of the candidates. So Ben Carson, Governor Walker, Ted Cruz, Trump, and Carly. And then, of course, like everything, somebody wins. So when that person wins, it makes it a pretty easy decision for me. As someone who, you know, like I like to say, I use the hashtag never Hillary, you know. So, but I think that the country, I think that Trump is going to win in a big way. I really do believe that. I mean, I think that there's so much ugliness. Yeah. Now, you know, is the guy perfect? Does he have, you know, foot and mouth disease at times? Yeah, he does. You know, he does. I mean, you know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, you know, and try to make excuses for some of the things that he, you know, that he sort of got into these little fights about. But people who sign their name to something, like me, my signature is my bond. If I sign my name to something, I mean, business people in here, you sign a contract, right? I mean, so all these individuals who sign this loyalty pledge, and then now they're not following through on it. I mean, I have no time for them, and I have been very public. I have none. You know, and I'll just finish by just saying that, you know, it's like, check your ego at the door. I mean, this is about this country. And what you have to believe, and I'm going to stand here today and tell you that we're going to be just fine. The kind of people that are coming around to help, to advise, to, you know, and to sit there and think through everything, education, you know, jobs, immigration, military, all this stuff, are some really extraordinary people, and very few of them are from the political class of our country, which I'm fine with. So now, I mean, the last time I was involved in politics, I was a senior in high school. You know, so I mean, the political class of our country, certainly at the federal level, but I can talk about some states too, has just completely failed. They failed, and so you know, and this last gentleman that was up here talking about how, you know, conservatives, you know, always compromise with the liberals, I guess, you know. I mean, what we should not fear in this country, we should not fear what our country was built upon, which is a set of Judeo-Christian principles and values. Do not fear that. Accept it. Actually accept it. That's what our Constitution is about. That's what this last day and a half has been talking about. But we have people that walk around and they're afraid. People are afraid in this country to be able to say that. You know, and I mean, and so like I like to say, the one ism that I like is American patriotism. And I think that what we need is we need people to be much stronger in what they actually believe. Now, you know, that's a relative comment because some people are afraid to say things, and because they're afraid, you know, they're going to get their car keyed or whatever, like he was talking about earlier. Now, I could go on and on, but we have potentially 5 Supreme Court justices in play. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 82, and Justice Thomas is, I think, 68. Okay? And the average age for when somebody either dies or leaves is about 75. The rest of them, the other 3 are right around 77 right now. I think one's 72. 5 Supreme Court justices. Okay, and Hillary Clinton has stated, and this is not unprecedented, to have a president become a Supreme Court justice. She stated that Barack Obama would make a great Supreme Court justice. I'm just telling you. So just that alone, just that fact alone, you have a 7-2 imbalance in the Supreme Court, then you will not. So all of us that are in here at a certain age, maybe not. It's not going to make any difference. But I know that there's a young man over here, a young kid over here, and that little boy that was up here this morning with the Pledge of Allegiance. God, how great was that?
That was great.
I mean, but it's that kid that's going to live in a socialist country. And what I hope for, right today, as I sit here today, I hope that it is still reversible. I'm not certain. I don't feel 100% confident to sit here today and tell you that the situation that our country is in today is reversible. But I know that we can give it a shot. And that's kind of where I'm at.
Gentleman in the corner, please.
This question is to either of you. If Iran's nuclear manufacturing capability continues unchecked, i.e. Hillary wins, what's the likelihood of a miniature nuclear device being smuggled into the United States and set off at, let's say, the Super Bowl, the World Series, something like that? Thank you.
You want to give it a
Please.
shot?
Yeah, why miniature? Why do you stipulate miniature? Their technological problem is not warheads, because they're quite capable of manufacturing warheads, and probably the North Koreans have tested them. Their technological problem is marrying those warheads with a delivery system, namely missiles. And that is why when Iran violates the agreement, the nuclear agreement, and tests missiles, it's a big deal, which is hardly ever explained. So they're trying to get to a point where they can deliver nuclear warheads against American targets, whether they're here or whether they're in Europe or the Middle East or Africa or wherever they may be. And that's what they're at. North Korea has that capacity right now, by the way. North Korea has nuclear weapons and ICBMs that can reach the west coast of the United States. So we are now vulnerable to nuclear attack. So don't always go Hollywood, miniature weapon zones. Nice big missiles landing. They love that. What's wrong with that? And they brag about it all the time. And the Iranians, by the way, have very good missiles. I am second to no one in my contempt for Iranian heroism, Iranian bravery, Iranian strategic thinking, and so forth. But one of the areas at which they really excel is ballistic missiles. They're good.
Very good.
They make very good missiles.
I mean, and then the other component of that is what we call a dirty nuclear bomb, which is essentially taking nuclear waste, weaponizing it with an improvised explosive device, like a plane. The planes that flew into the World Trade Centers, in New York, those were improvised explosive devices. So you can take nuclear waste, and it doesn't have the same effect as a nuclear explosion, but it has probably the same fear effect, the same level of fear that it would instill in a society. And we know that they have the intention to do that. So we know that the Islamic State has the intention to create that kind of a capability and then use it somewhere. And when they use it, they want to use it to get the maximum damage. I mean, 3,000 people in one day, that's nothing for these guys. I mean, to kill 3 million, that would be a great thing in how these people think and how this ideology thinks. So we have to be cautious and sort of alert to what it is that we're facing. And I think that we have to go after this enemy in a big way. We are going to have to really defeat this enemy, and there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And once we've made the decision to win, there's not going to be any problems winning. but we're going to have to decide to do things a little bit differently than we have been doing them.
Gentleman on my left.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to presume that I can speak on behalf of everybody in the room. It is an absolute honor and privilege to have both of you here, and Mary, a fabulous job of moderating another panel. Thank you so much. I've read your book and commend it to everyone, not only in this room, but outside this room. It's a fabulous work, and thank you for doing that. My question is, I don't think...
Name affiliation for folks who don't know.
Oh, Bob Beaupre, a member of the Steamboat Institute,
Thank you.
and admirer, friend of Michael Ledine's for a long time. And General, it's an honor to meet you. The question I have, having read the book, I don't think we quite got through your strategy for defeating ISIS. And we got the first couple steps, but we didn't get the rest of them. I'd love for you to, in the couple minutes we've got left, to outline what's remaining in that strategy.
I wrote them down,
Thank you.
actually. I wrote them down because there's 4 strategic steps, and then we talk about each one in the book and in the chapter How to Win. And then number 1, and we've talked a little bit about it up here, about just clearly defining this enemy and making sure that every element of our being can go after it. But essentially the sort of the 4 steps are to energize every element of national power that we have. One of the things that we have that is underused right now, in fact it's not used because we can't clearly define the enemy, is our ability to do information operations like we did against communism for 40 years. I mean, I get on Voice of America once in a while, and and they're like questioning my who I am, instead of actually trying to help us get a message. This is a government-funded, this is a taxpayer-funded organization too. The second thing is we have to engage violent jihadists wherever they are. So wherever they are, that means if we find them in a country and they're safe havening in that country, basically they're being protected, we have to go after them. So many times we knew where people were, particularly in Pakistan or in Syria. When we were in Iraq, and we knew the guy was right over there, and we would go back and say, hey, we have bulletproof intelligence where this guy's at. He's in Syria. We'd like to go get him. And we'd like to go capture him, actually, not kill him. We wanted to go capture him. And denied, constantly denied. One of the things, and you may remember this in the book, two camps in Somalia, 2 camps, 150 guys in each of the camps. We watched them. We wanted to destroy them. We had every ability to destroy both camps. So a total of 300 individuals. A third of them we knew were white guys like me who would return to Europe or the United States, and we were not allowed to destroy those camps for whatever reason. I can tell you why. I mean, it was political correctness mainly under this administration. So that was pretty bad. The third thing is we have to confront. We've been talking about this up here, especially on Iran, particularly state, and then the non-state supporters and the enablers of this violent capability, this violent element. One of the things that we should have done, and I said this, we should have embraced, and we can still do this, President al-Sisi in Egypt. I mean, this guy has his country, and he's not a secularist. We've trained him. I've worked with this guy. I know him, and we need to help his country. We need to help Jordan. We need to help others. But we also need to tell countries like Saudi Arabia, here's your choice. You either do this or do that. One or the other. We cannot be gray or dance around on the head of a pin here. We have got to be very blunt. And that's called tough love or tough diplomacy. Instead of having John Kerry bring James Taylor around.
Actually, I think that's torture, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is torture. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And then the last thing is, and Michael really articulated this, we have to wage ideological war against this ideology. We have to be able to do that. We cannot do that right now. This administration does not allow us to do that. At least those in government. So we have to be able to do that. I mean, we did this against communism. I mean, so there's a good model there. We just have to really understand what it is. and the way I say it, and people can disagree, but Islam is a political ideology. It's a political ideology. Okay, all these people that go, well, this is a religion. It's a religion of peace. I don't hear a lot of people killing, lighting up a bar in Orlando or blowing up, a marathon in Boston, yelling Jesus Christ. So this is not a religion of peace, or it's not an ideology of peace. This is an ideology that is a political ideology, and it has to be dealt with as a political system. I mean, the names of these countries, the Islamic State of Iran, the Islamic State of Pakistan, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. We, the United States of America, because we were too stupid in 2004, we allowed Sharia law to be put into their constitution. Why would we have done that? Because we didn't know. We didn't know. The Bonn Agreement. Go look at the Bonn Agreement, 2004. We basically wrote the constitution for the government of Afghanistan, and we allowed Sharia law to be put into it. Sharia law, it's a legal system. It's part of a political ideology called Islam. Okay? And that's what we have to start to come to grips with. Now, I have all kinds of debates on that with different, Muslims who practice Islam as a religion, but I don't see it. I don't see it.
Do I have time for one more question, Jennifer? One very, very, very quick question. The gentleman in the back. Sorry. He's got the mic.
Hello, my name's John Perlis. I'm affiliated with all the other objectivists in the room. My question is to the General. Do you believe Barack Obama is a fool or setting us up for a big loss?
I didn't hear him.
Barack Obama. Do you think he's a fool, or was this intentional?
No, he's not. No, all you have to do.
Setting us up for a big failure.
Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is read what he's written, listen to what he said, and he's pretty much followed his path. He's followed his beliefs. And he's not incompetent. He's in terms of what he believes in. He's not that way. I mean, in other aspects of national security, I mean, clearly is. But in what he believes, I mean, he has apologized for America being America. For American, I mean, he's the one that said, what's this about American exceptionalism? He doesn't agree with it. So, but for all of us, this country voted him in twice. So, you know what? I don't blame Barack Obama. I blame the American public for not being awake at the switch. Maybe not so much the first time, because, I think that people were just sick of what they had felt over the previous 8 years, and things weren't all that hot. But the second time, shame on us. And so, all these never Trumpers or people, I'm not going to vote, or I'm going to do a write-in, good luck. Good luck with what you're going to end up with.
So how do we elevate that particular point as we approach this election?
There's something called a harder right choice. Okay? A harder right choice. It's easy to do the easy thing. But when it comes down to making the harder right choice, it's a hard choice sometimes. And it's not so much that it's not going to be totally acceptable. It's not going to be the perfect candidate. There's nobody perfect. No one's perfect. And all the great leaders that we have had in our history, and I will tell you, this particular election, I don't know what we have. I don't know. I mean, you can't predict the future. But when I look at probably George Washington, maybe Abraham Lincoln, maybe Roosevelt, but not so much. I'm not all that big of a fan of his. And then certainly Ronald Reagan. This election, so I don't know if Donald Trump's that kind of guy. I believe in what I believe in and what I see and what I hear. But if we get this one wrong, this country, 8 years from now, because it'll be 8 years, you'll wake up and you won't recognize this country.
Unfortunately, we have to end it there because we're running a bit over time. Please join me in thanking General Dr. Levine. Thanks very much.